Welcome back, car people. Regular channel viewers will know me, but if you're coming across my channel for the first time, I'm Kevin from Stream Cars. I'm a luxury car dealer specializing in sports and prestige cars in a place called Bagshot in Surrey, which is about 3 miles from Ascot. Most people will have heard of Ascot. I specialize in Aston Martins in particular. They're one of my favorite brands, and over the years I've sold dozens of them. So no one needs an Aston Martin in their life, do they? It's a want, it's a passion, a desire to be involved in one of the coolest brands in the world. And I think now that Adrian Newey, the sport's most successful Formula One car designer, is involved in the Aramco Formula One team, that's going to elevate their performance. And what Henry Ford used to say is win on Sunday, sell on Monday. That is clearly going to have an effect. And I think the road cars that are now down to something like £15,000 in the classifieds are going to become more desirable. So I thought I'd make a video for you here about the different models in the Aston Martin range and the costs associated with running them. So I've been very lucky in my 20 years as a car dealer, selling many Aston Martins through that time, from DB7s to Vanquish from the early 2000s through to the more modern Vantage and DB11 of the era that we're in right now. But the cars that I'm going to particularly be talking about are the Gaydon Era cars from 2005 to 2015, because that's the window where there's the most buyers. Let me start with the V8 Vantage. That was unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show in 2005 to bring younger buyers to the brand. It had exquisite looks and excellent proportions, and Aston Martin would go on to make around 25,000 examples of those until its replacement in 2018 with the new Mercedes 4-litre V8 engined car. The models arrived late in 2005, the 380 brake horsepower 4.3-litre V8, and then interior updates arrived in 2007, and in 2008 the engine was revised to 4.7-litre, producing 420 brake horsepower. The S arrived in 2012, increasing horsepower again by 10 bhp, but 15 pounds-foot of torque, and the final edition was the range-topping V12. Along the way, a few special editions, the N420, 430, and the AMR. So the cars were available as a coupe or convertible, the convertible known as Roadster, and the gearbox options were a 6-speed manual or an automatic, which they called the Sport Shift, which was in essence a clutchless manual. It was a little bit jerky and did take some getting used to. Most buyers, I think, favour the manual car. It took 6 years for Aston Martin to develop the Sport Shift gearbox into what they call Sport Shift 2, and then Sport Shift 3 came only a year later on the final flagship edition of the V12S. Right, at this point, I've had to change angles. The sun is streaming through the window now. You wouldn't believe I'm about 4 hours into making this video, what with the editing and the cutting and splicing and takes and retakes that I'm having to do, being a dinosaur and not au fait with all this technology. So if I haven't put you to sleep yet and you're following along with interest, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe to the channel. That'd be much appreciated. If you go back, there are a number of videos on my channel over the years where I've pointed out what to look for when buying an Aston Martin, but I've got a number of new subscribers to the channel, so I thought it was worth updating those details. Now, I only tend to stock the very nicest examples of cars, and I look for cosmetically clean examples, but also ones that have an excellent maintenance record. You can always do something with the condition of a car. You can never put a history with a car that hasn't been serviced. So maintenance records are incredibly important. Sadly, these days, something called GPDR, which is data protection nonsense, doesn't prevent dealers from passing on service histories with their cars. Unfortunately, that's an excuse given by lots of main dealers and other dealers that perhaps don't have a history and say, oh, we can't pass it on to you under these rules. But I always look for a car that has an excellent maintenance history record, and I'll pop an image in here of the type of thing that I'm talking about. Obviously, cars that are 15 to 20 years old may have missed their annual service, but may only have covered 2 or 3,000 miles in that period, and I think that's forgivable. But in essence, I'd like to see a car that has a specialist service history at best, or at worst, and an Aston Martin main dealer history if the owner has had deep pockets and continues servicing it at the main dealer. So yes, tyres are important, as are keys. On the early cars, they came with 2 keys and potentially a valet key with 2 fobs for opening and closing the doors. And then on the later model, they came with what was called the ECU, the glass emotional control unit, crystal key, and a plastic key alongside that. The plastic key has a problem where the buttons crush, with people being a little bit over heavy with the pushing of the buttons, perhaps pushing their nail through them. The crystal key also, when one pushes that into the dashboard, it can have a habit of pinging back out and falling down onto the center console, or indeed, if one just drops it onto any hard surface, it will crack, chip, damage that key. That won't affect its operation, but it is obviously then not a very pretty looking thing to have in your hand or in your pocket. And of course, the glass crystal key is all about going into your golf club and putting it on the bar and saying, I've got an Aston Martin. So when it comes to keys, make sure the vehicle has all of the keys that it should have, because they are also expensive to replace. The key fobs on the early cars are actually an old Volvo unit, so they are less expensive, but if you buy it from Aston Martin, you'll pay all the money. The new plastic and crystal key, £500 for the plastic one, £1,000 for the crystal one, and there are companies out there that you will find that do it for less than that. I'm not going to promote them because I did ask them if they would sponsor the video and they declined. So you can unfortunately have to find that out for yourself, but Google Aston Martin key repair and the companies do come up. So one of the big problems, and sadly the biggest cosmetic issue for me, is the corrosion to the paintwork, the bubbling in the paintwork on these VH era cars. This is not rust, it's to do with the paint process and the fact that the paint doesn't adhere fully to the panel and can cause bubbling. It manifests itself in all areas of the car, quite honestly, around the bonnet, the edges of the door handles, the mirror arms, the wing mirrors, the wiper blades, all sorts of things. Look, we can send men to the moon, so we can fix it. It's not a problem, but the cost of doing so can be around £400-500 per panel, and you can end up having to have a full respray. In fact, a lot of the cars that I will only sell are cars that have been fully resprayed and are absolutely perfect. So that's something to be aware of. But the cost of resprays will also come down to the color of the car. The colors, the popular colors, the ubiquitous black, gray, silver. Then you have blue. Red is a really lovely color, Toro red. Morning Frost white, which is less popular, but a really lovely white metallic paint that pops in the sun. The different paints are more expensive to paint and take a more specialized technique to do it. So that is also a factor when you're considering that. So if corrosion doesn't bother you, it's only cosmetic and it won't be a problem to drive the car, but it can be unsightly. Another issue of corrosion, though, can be to the subframe, and that is something to be very aware of, because again, it was to do with a similar process, wasn't protected, and that's a more costly job to rectify. I don't have a price for that because of all the cars I've ever sold. never ever been an issue, but I do see people talking about it on the forums these days, so something to be aware of. Now let's talk about the interiors. Beautiful English leather that is used in the car, and obsidian black tends to be the most popular, perhaps phantom grey also if you want a lighter cabin, matching with the Taylor's grey Alcantara headlining. Occasionally you'll come across a car with iron ore leather, that's a very dark burgundy. I've been disparaging about that colour in the past, but there are people out there that like it, along with bitter chocolate, a colour that you very rarely see on cars these days. But the leather is very, very soft, and marks on the driver's bolster, also on the door card where people close the door, and if they've got long fingernails or jewelry on their hand, is very easy to mark that panel. Also, cars that have been outdoors and particularly in the sun, over on the dashboard binnacle and up on the top roll of the dashboard where the leather can shrink and stretch, and those panels would eventually, if it's to your standard or mine at least, be retrimmed, and that will cost anywhere, depending on the trimmer that you use, around $250 for a panel. They're pretty easy to get out and go back in if you know where to pull, but certainly don't pull on the wrong place, because then you'll snap the pins at the back, and that will cause no end of problems with it going back, and then it won't sit flush and it will rattle. So that's a job that needs to be done properly. Also, while we're talking about the interior, the center slope that runs down the dashboard is called the ski slope. Often that is in piano black, which I think is the most attractive. You'll see cars occasionally with some carbon, or the older gentlemen tend to like the walnut style fascia. These can, on cars that have sat-nav fitted, they have a very, very slight crack, that spider's web crack, that goes up to the edge of the reveal of the sat-nav screen. So that's something also to be aware of. Replacing a waterfall is not a job that I've had to do, but again, you know, it's Aston Martin and could be potentially very costly. Other notable weak points on the car are the headlights. The lenses can fade, discolor, or get stress cracks in them. That's only cosmetic and doesn't affect the driving of the car, but God forbid one of the LEDs goes, and then the headlight will need to come out and be either replaced with a new or second-hand unit, depending on how deep your pockets are, or there are really good companies out there that will repair the light for £300. So that is probably your best solution. The rear lights are also affected by condensation. A lot of people have changed the red rear lenses to the clear rear lenses, which are about £600 each, £1,200 a pair. It does make the car look more modern. These can also be repaired by the companies that do the headlight repairs. And another item that comes to mind is the struts that hold open the bonnet, the boot, and the doors. They have a tendency to lose their compression over the time, and then of course the weakness of them means that the door or the bonnet, the boot will drop. They are not expensive. The last pair I bought for the doors on a car were £80, and they can be purchased from Aston Martin bits. Owners generally do replace them because it's not an expensive job, but another thing to look for. Now, if you've stuck with me this far, we're going to get into the really expensive and juicy bits. Let's first of all talk about the engine. The V8 engine has actually generally been considered very reliable, and whilst it's not, in my experience, been a problem, some owners, I believe, have suffered problems with the 4.7 due to big end bearing failure. I imagine that's a very costly job and would cost somewhere in the region of £10,000 to have a rebuild. The other thing that I get asked on every Vantage that I've ever sold is the clutch okay? Has the clutch been replaced? Now, it's as if people think they're made of chocolate. The clutch will go 70, 80,000 miles from new, as long as the car is driven sympathetically. But of course, you could destroy a clutch in a week, a month, depending on how it's driven. And the only car that I've ever sold that failed was a gentleman that actually ended up taking his car to Belgium and around the Spa circuit, and then he had a failure after that. So they are actually very robust if driven properly, but do budget across your lifetime if you own the car for a number of years that a clutch may be required as a replacement. There is a company out there that offers a dual clutch replacement. The cost was £2,500. It's probably gone up now, and I think you should be budgeting around £3,000 for that. The Sport Shift clutch, on the other hand, is dearer, but that's an item that can be checked using the AMDS software, and you can check the clutch wear on that. But I would say to allow £4,000 if you're going to be replacing the clutch. Brakes are readily available from any aftermarket vendor and specialist, and that's a figure that I would put £2,000 on for replacing brakes and pads, depending on your preference. And then the final thing that I'm going to talk about on this part of the video is electrical problems. Owning an Aston Martin can be frightening when you first encounter a dashboard warning light. I know it was for me, and it will be for many of you too. But thankfully, there's usually not a problem. It all relates to a low voltage battery. The car does seem to chew batteries, especially when left unused, and it's always important to leave the car on a trickle charger. If you do encounter a warning light, most likely it is due to low voltage, and just starting and driving the car will eradicate that light and the light will go out. If it stays on, then whatever the problem it's identifying is likely to remain. But one tip I'll give you, and probably the best tip that you'll take from the entire video, is that the batteries are located behind the driver's seat, in the DB9 under the rear passenger seat, and in the Vantage in the shelf behind the driver and passenger, where you lift out the carpet and the foam, and you'll find it in there. Now, of course, if you have a flat battery, how do you move your electric seat forward? It's an absolute nightmare. I even cracked a rib one time trying to get a battery out when the car was flat, and I couldn't pull the driver's seat forward, only was able to fold the backrest forward slightly. So it's a real problem and something to be aware of. Even if the car is on trickle charge, the battery can still die if it's left for a long time. So I really think that's a top tip and something to be aware of. So don't be afraid of electrical problems as long as the car is kept on a trickle charger. Sometimes you might see a warning that says alarm system service. There is no alarm system to service. It's rather unusual warning, but what that means is the battery has gone flat in the alarm sounder, and rather than take the car to Aston Martin and spend probably £500-600 having a new alarm sounder fitted, all you need is a battery from a Volvo or a Ford. It's easily found on eBay. I do have the part number, but no point listing it here. You'll find it on one of those platforms yourself. A Ford Motor Company car siren alarm battery, 2.4 volt, and you can pick that up easily for about £24, and that will save you hundreds of pounds. Of course, there is fitting involved in that, but that is probably the best tip I'm going to give you when it comes to running an Aston Martin. So in summary, if you haven't been put off by the costs, then let's talk about the cost of running the car. Well, of course, you've got the cost to buy it, and obviously the cheaper examples will need more work doing to them. So it's always better to find a car that's being sold at a specialist that's been fettled and had all the work done. And then I think you can expect to pay somewhere in the region of £600 to £1,000 for annual servicing. Fuel driven sensibly, the car will return about 20 miles to the gallon on average. Tax is quite a big one now, since our lovely Labour government have put up the cost of road tax, and you'll have the pleasure of giving Her Majesty's government £760 for, oh, I said Her Majesty's, didn't I? I meant His Majesty. £760 for a year of road tax. But of course, do remember that you can sawn the vehicle when it's not on road. So a lot of times cars are kept in the garage over winter and you will only pay for 6 months of that. Insurance, of course, is subject to the driver and the area that you live in, but in my experience, it's an awful lot cheaper than many other cars that are on the road, and you'll be pleasantly surprised if you get a quotation for it. So I think the sweet spot is probably a car of around '09, a manual car with the better upgrades, the better seat stitching, the glass key, and the more dynamic sports pack suspension. I look to be paying mid to late 30s, early £40,000 for a car like that. The next section of the video that I'm going to go on to will cover the models DB9, DBS, Virage, but everything that I've told you here will also relate to all those cars, so it will be a lot shorter going forward towards the end of the video. So if you don't want to watch towards the end, then thank you for watching up until this point, and I hope you've got good information from it. And if you're staying along, then wait for the next section. So the car logically to talk about next is the DB9, and in this section I will include Virage as well. Now, the DB9 was introduced in 2005 with a V12 engine producing 450 horsepower and a proper automatic gearbox, as opposed to the sport shift that was in the Vantage. The car also had an option of a manual gearbox, and a few of them indeed, exist on the market and do command a premium over the automatic car, as does the GT model, which was a very desirable special edition, and the even rarer Le Mans special edition. You'll pay more for those, which are both coveted examples. The DB9 lasted 2005 to 2009, when Aston Martin decided to drop the DB9 name and reintroduce the car with the name Virage. It had 470 brake horsepower engine, and the interior was tweaked with glass switches, better interior leather, Bang & Olufsen hi-fi, carbon ceramic discs. It was a very, very expensive car, and I guess it didn't sell as well as they had hoped. And then that was pulled from the lineup, and the DB9 reintroduced with some of the options that the Virage had as standard, and it then was sold at a lower price and was a much more popular car. You will find that Virages, however, command a premium over the counterpart of a DB9 because of their low production numbers. So the car has a V12 engine, and clearly that's going to be a more costly unit to maintain and service. But something to talk about, although the V12 is generally a robust engine, there is a few, what are they called, threads on forums regarding the dreaded engine tick, which is a metallic ticking noise that can develop at idle, and it's usually because of wear in the cylinder liners and the small end bearings. In severe cases, it can require a very costly engine rebuild. Other potential engine problems include issues with the breather circuit, which leads to misfires causing catalyst failure. Now, it is possible to plug the car into AMDS software and check for misfires, which is something I always do, because notwithstanding you don't want to inherit a car with that problem, the cost of spark plugs and coil packs is not an insignificant cost to replace. Somewhere in the region of £3,000 to £5,000 wherever you take them. Coil packs, if you wonder what they are something that provides the higher voltage necessary to create a spark to the plug, and Aston Martin, in their wisdom, fitted them to this car. So that is a costly job, and something that Aston Martin recommend around 70 to 80,000 miles. But because it is expensive, it isn't a job that one does until you start to feel that you need to have it done. It's one that is a kind of a not so much a preventative maintenance, but a when and if needs be. In terms of the running costs, I'm going to say servicing should be you should be allowing £800 to £1,200 for that. Fuel will be around 17 miles to the gallon if driven sensibly, and tax will be the same as it's in the top bracket, and that's again £760 a year. But of course, remember that you've got the option to sawn when not in use. Insurance is actually remarkably cheap. I've sold so many DB9s, and everyone that I've ever sold a car to expresses how cheap that they have found the insurance to be, and in many cases significantly under £500, depending on the age of the driver and where they live. Right, now we need to mention the Rapide, the often forgotten model, the four-door car introduced to address the issues of the DB9's pathetic rear seats, and this was a true four-seater. And what a tremendous car, built from 2010 to 2020, introduced as the Rapide initially with the same 470 brake horsepower engine, but then they introduced the Rapide S, and what a fantastic car that is. True 200 mile an hour four-seat car with 565 brake horsepower. Prices are around £30,000 for a high mileage older one, right up to £100,000 for a late 2020 model with low mileage and some carbon bits on it. So really tremendous car if you're in the market for something with four seats to carry a family. The one to get would be to get the one with rear seat entertainment if you can find one. Of course, running costs being the V12, the same as the DB9 that I previously mentioned, so don't need to cover that. The final two models to talk about will be the DBS and the Vanquish, which is the flagship of the range. But the DBS is my personal favourite, and I happen to have one in stock at the time of filming this video. Aston Martin has a long association with James Bond 007, going all the way back to the DB5, driven by Sean Connery in Goldfinger, and the DBS appeared on our screens in the movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Casino Royale, and Quantum of Solace. So if you want a true Bond car, the DBS is the one to have. It's fair to say that it is a more muscular DB9, a DB9 on steroids, if you will. Power is up to 520 brake horsepower, and the luxury is up to, it really feels a more special car. The seats are comfier. There's the introduction of carbon fiber. There were a couple of special editions. There was the UB 2010, and that was named after Ulrich Bez, who was the chairman of Aston Martin at the time. Then there was the carbon editions, carbon black edition, and finally the ultimate edition, which incredibly commands a significant premium over the other models, in spite of it only having a few cosmetic changes and a logoed filler cap. But there are people out there prepared to pay the premium for that car. It is the same running costs as the previous cars I've mentioned. So nothing to address there. But the final car in the lineup that we're talking about in the era of cars that I've made this video about is the Vanquish, a name that was reintroduced, and it was an evolution of all previous models that had come before it, with cutting edge, for Aston at least, cutting edge use of aero and carbon fiber. I think a really stylish car, and beginning to look incredibly cheap now. They've gone out of favour a little bit, strangely, and you can find examples for under £60,000. Perhaps it's the interior. The leather seats have a rather odd bobbly finish, or even odder, perhaps the square steering wheel that was taken from the Aston Martin 177. The interior switchgear is cleaner and more stylish and has a modern feel with the haptic touch buttons. But one expensive problem that I certainly encountered myself was due to what was called a faulty Pectron unit. This is the SKU, as they call it, the brain responsible for the key electronic functions of the car. And Aston Martin, in their wisdom, put the hi-fi into this same unit. So I had a problem with the Bang Olufsen hi-fi, and it meant that I had to change the Pectron unit, which was very, very costly. That cost me £7,000 to actually sort that out. It's not a problem that I've come across on other cars. Maybe it was just related to that car, and there could have been a reason for it. But these are sometimes the anomalies of Aston Martin ownership, where you do get a car that throws up an expensive problem. The running costs again are similar, but you do get top of the range performance. 565 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, 183 miles per hour, 19 miles to the gallon, not certainly driven like that. And again, the highest tax. Gosh, listening to all that back, that's enough to put anyone off wanting to buy an Aston Martin, isn't it? No, seriously, they are wonderful cars, and they should be no more expensive than buying any performance car, any German make or Italian sports car. They are a wonderful car to be part of a community. The love that actually you get driving an Aston Martin from the members of the public, that they don't particularly recognize all the different models, and in fairness, they are all just evolutions of each other. They look very similar, but my experience is that you get let out at junctions and people come past you on the motorway, give you the thumbs up. People will approach in petrol stations, and they obviously know the James Bond reference, and they talk about that. So they are a really lovely car to own, but go in with your eyes wide open. Buy the best example that you can. Generally try and buy a car from a specialist like myself, hopefully. That's the purpose of making this video, to give you the reassurance. But there are many garages out there and lots of good independent mechanics and specialists that keep the marques running more modestly. So it's taken me an awfully long time to create this video. I hope I haven't put you to sleep. If you did enjoy it, I would appreciate a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe to the channel. It all helps with growing what I'm trying to do, and I hope you've enjoyed it. So thank you very much for watching, and look out for cars as they come to the forecourt as I get them.